Hello, class. I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about symbolism in literature. A lot of the prompts for your papers, as well as the prompts for the discussion boards, are going to include this word symbolism. Symbolism in literature is kind of a in-depth subject of its own, and since these are stories that are made up, since they're fictional, it is kind of up to the reader to determine what symbols represent what ideas. So, what symbols are really concrete things, everyday items that represent, or people that represent something that is non concrete, like hope or freedom or something along those lines. So, let's take a little bit of a look at some of these things. So, an abstract idea, as I said, could be hope or freedom or love or something along those lines. Think about the symbol of the heart, right, for Valentine's Day. We give red roses, we give red hearts, these types of things are symbols of love. But red is also a color that represents anger. We say that when people are extremely angry, they see red. So symbols can have variations. So we're going to just go through some of the conventional symbols here, and there's a ton of stuff on here, but we're just going to run through it quickly and pick out some of the more important ones. So a symbol could be a word, it could be a figure of speech, it could be a character. Most likely it's a thing, though. Red, as we just said, is passion, right? Is danger, right? Stop signs have red and white on them. It's also often associated with fire. Black cats are symbols of Halloween. In old Western movies, the bad guy used to wear a black hat and the good guy would wear a white hat, right? White is a symbol of innocence and purity, as green is an experience. A symbol of inexperience. We call people who are first time employees in a career greenhorns, right? They haven't learned yet. It's also the symbol of spring, all that sort of thing. We're going to be reading a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper later on. And yellow is a very interesting color because we associate it with things like the sun, and we associate it with things like flowers, daffodils, sunflowers, things like that. It's bright, it's happy, but it's also can take on a completely different aspect, rotting, decay. A lot of body fluids are yellow. So think about that. There's some odd things to the color yellow. Blue is cool. Pink is innocence, femininity, right? Young little girls often wear pink. Purple is an important color because it's the color of royalty. Um, let's see what else here. Seasons. The seasons follow along with a lot of these. A lot of the colors can be found in the different seasons. Like autumn, you'll find browns and oranges like that. Springs, you'll find greens and yellows, things like that. But we can also relate these things to being a life cycle. So spring is birth, then summer's maturity, autumn is decline, and winter is death. Easter. There's a lot of religious content to a lot of these stories. Not most, I shouldn't say most, but many short stories have some sort of religious aspect that they're either evaluating or contemplating. So when we talk about things like Easter, it's the season of rebirth, right? So that's when Jesus was, according to the Bible, that's when Jesus was resurrected on Easter Sunday. So there's rebirth, there's enlightenment, and that sort of thing. Trees important. The apple tree. Whenever you see an apple tree in something, I want you to immediately go back to the Bible and think about Adam and Eve, the story of Eve eating the fruit of knowledge. That's why teachers, if you see like teachers' Christmas ornaments or mugs or things like that, they often have an apple on them because an apple is a symbol of knowledge, which represents a loss of innocence. An oak tree here in Florida, we have plenty of these huge live oaks, right? And if you look at them, they look like kind of like someone standing and raising their arms in the air. They represent strength. Trees also can represent wisdom. There's trees that are 3,000 years old, right? The trees out in California, some trees in Africa are more than 2,000 or 3,000 years old. So these are important symbols. a pine tree, that's the reason why people bring pine trees into their homes at Christmas time, because it's evergreen, and people used to in Germany and some of these colder places would bring in trees to remind themselves that yes, there is still life out there because they have a long cold winter. So it becomes a symbol of immortality. Nature, we're going to skip over that for right now. Miscellaneous objects like the water and the moon, they all have different symbols. Um, Directions, again, this kind of goes back to the idea of life and death, right, where you have the sun rising in the east and going down in the west, and therefore the east represents rebirth and the west represents old age and the passage of time. A lot of these things can be found in different stories. Animals are kind of important. We see a lot of these in different films. Think about Harry Potter or any of these other types of fantasy movies that are so popular. The lamb is a popular one because it represents sacrifice. It represents spring. It represents Jesus. An owl, symbol of wisdom. Of course, Harry Potter has an owl. The serpent or the snake. We're going to see a snake in at least one story, and it's an important character in the story, as a matter of fact. And that snake can represent temptation, evil. Snake can also represent change or rebirth, right? Because they shed their skin and they seem to come out looking all shiny and bright on the other side. Edgar Allan Poe talks about the raven, of course, and he's a symbol of messenger that can fly back and forth between the afterlife and or the underworld, actually. And so he is a messenger of death and destruction and stuff like that. Of course, the peace is symbolized by the dove. And that's it. I just want you to remember one thing about symbols, and that's that they are not, authors will never say if they're intentionally put these things in there, even if they're still alive. A couple of our authors still are alive, but they're not going to say that oh, this is in there for that reason, or this is in there for that reason, or I intended to do that, and they don't usually set out trying to just include different symbols here and there. As I said, these things are kind of generally accepted. So when an author's creating, it's natural that they would include these things sort of subconsciously as symbolic of the message that they're trying to send. So for one person, the snake in the story that we're going to read, it's in the short story Sweat by Zora Neale Hurston. The snake is actually a good character, while for others it represents the devil, or it could represent other things as well. So there's also actually a Chinaberry tree in that one as well. There's a number of trees in some of the stories we're reading, and you'll find a lot of these symbols are in there as well. So this week we're talking about A&P. So I asked a question about the farm animals, right? The sheep um, and the pigs, and there's a line in there about feathers getting ruffled, right, which means some sort of a bird. So think about that. What could that possibly mean in regard to the people who are shopping in the supermarket? All right. If you have questions, please let me know. Thanks.